You need to leave. This week. The words came out of my brother Daniel's mouth as if they were the most natural thing in the world. He was leaning against the doorframe of what had been my temporary room for the past 6 months, his arms crossed, that look of superiority I had known since childhood. What? I could barely process what I had just heard. You heard him, Matt. It's time to move on. We can't support 2 families here anymore. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still holding the cell phone where I had just seen a belated condolence message from a distant cousin. It had only been 3 months since our father had died of a sudden heart attack, and I was still trying to process the loss. My name is Matt, I'm 32 years old, and until that moment, I believed that family meant unconditional support in life's most difficult moments. When Dad died, I was completely lost. Not financially, but emotionally. The house where we grew up was quickly sold to pay off the medical bills that had accumulated during his last months of life. Daniel, my brother who is 5 years older than me, offered his house as a temporary refuge. Just until you get back on your feet, he had said at the time, with that protective tone of an older brother that I always respected. But now, just 6 months later, he was standing there telling me to leave as if I were a delinquent tenant. Daniel, I contribute to the expenses. I pay my share of the groceries. I help with the electric bills. It's not about money, he interrupted me, running his hand through her hair the way our father used to do when he was nervous. It's about space. Jessica is pregnant. My stomach dropped. Jessica had been his wife for 4 years, a sweet woman who had always treated me well. At least I thought so. Congratulations, I managed to say, genuinely happy despite the shock. But that doesn't mean I have to leave right away. I can help, I can. Matt, be realistic. You've always been his favorite. You've always had it easier. Now it's time to grow up and face life on your own, like I had to. The phrase hit me like a punch in the stomach. Favorite? I had spent the last 10 years working 2 jobs to support myself, while Daniel had inherited the family business and married a woman from a wealthy family. I never asked to be anyone's favorite, I muttered. It doesn't matter what you asked for. It matters what you got. And now you need to learn to fend for yourself. That night, as I packed my bags in the stifling silence of that room, a strange memory came to mind. 2 weeks before he died, Dad had called me in for a private conversation. He said something about important documents stored at the family law firm, something about securing his future. I was so focused on taking care of her that I didn't pay much attention. Maybe it was time to investigate what he meant. I left his brother's house that Friday with 2 suitcases and a strange determination growing in my chest. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about independence, but he had no idea what he was really awakening in me. If you're following this story and want to know how it all unfolded, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next completely changed our lives. While Daniel was secretly celebrating getting rid of his dead-weight brother, I was about to discover that some life lessons cost much more than we imagine. The apartment I managed to rent with the little money I had was a tiny studio on the cheapest side of town. The kind of place where you can hear every conversation your neighbors have through the thin walls, and where the shower only works if you hit the wall in a specific way. But at least it was his. That first night, sitting on the mattress that served as both bed and sofa, I called the law firm that had handled our father's affairs. The name was etched in my memory, Peterson and Associates. "Ah yes, Mr. Matthew," said the receptionist when I mentioned my name. Mr. Harold left specific instructions. Mr. Peterson would like to speak with his personal assistant. I made an appointment for the next morning. Meanwhile, messages from Daniel began to arrive. Not apologies or concern for his well-being. They were reminders about things he had forgotten to take. "You left your printer here. I need the space in the office. Some of his clothes are in the closet. I'll donate them if you don't pick them up by Friday." Each message was a calculated reminder that I was no longer welcome, that my presence had been a nuisance he had finally managed to eliminate. Jessica, his wife, didn't send a single message. Not even a good luck or sorry about the circumstances. Her silence hurt almost as much as my brother's coldness. The next morning, I walked through the quiet hallways of Peterson and Associates. Dr. Peterson was a man in his 60s, with that paternal manner that inspires instant confidence. "His father came to see me 3 weeks before he passed away," he began, opening a thick folder on the table. "He said he needed to organize some important things. That there was information you needed to know." My heart raced. He mentioned that her relationship with Daniel had always been complicated, that he feared that after his death, you would be vulnerable. The lawyer slid a sealed envelope across the table. He left this for you. He said to open it only if Daniel tried to take advantage of the situation. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were documents that turned my world upside down. Dad hadn't just predicted what Daniel would do to me. He had left evidence of something much more serious. The family business that Daniel had inherited? In fact, it was half his and half mine. Dad had transferred 45% of the shares to his name 2 years before he died, but he had kept it a secret. Daniel ran the company, but I was the majority shareholder without knowing it. There was more. Much more. Bank records showing that Daniel had embezzled company funds for personal investments. Fraudulent contracts. Compromising emails. All carefully documented by our father in the last months of his life. He said he hoped he would never have to use this, Dr. Peterson murmured. But that if Daniel showed her true colors, you would have the tools you needed to protect yourself. I sat in silence for several long minutes, processing the magnitude of what I had discovered. My brother hadn't just kicked me out because of jealousy or a need for space. He had pushed me away because I posed a threat to the empire he thought he had built on his own. Dad's favorite. The words echoed in my mind with a whole new meaning. Dad didn't favor me out of weakness or sentimentality. He had seen something in Daniel that I was blind to. A greed, a cruelty that grew silently beneath the veneer of the protective older brother. There's something else, said the lawyer, sliding over another document. His father also documented conversations where Daniel expressed, let's say, questionable intentions about the future of the company and about you. I remember leaving that office in complete shock. The streets seemed brighter, the sounds clearer. As if I had emerged from a fog I didn't know existed. Daniel thought he had gotten rid of his troublesome brother. In fact, he had awakened the majority partner of her own company. That night, in my tiny apartment, I organized all the documents on the makeshift table. Each piece of paper was a piece of a puzzle that revealed years of manipulation and lies. But it was also something more powerful. It was the keys to the kingdom that Daniel thought he ruled alone. While he was probably celebrating his victory at home, planning how to use my old bedroom as an office, I was discovering that I had the power to turn his life into a legal nightmare. The irony was delicious. He kicked me out to gain more control, and ended up handing me absolute control. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I had in my hands. And more importantly, how to use it in the most devastating way possible. The following days were a roller coaster of discoveries that made me question everything I thought I knew about my family. Each document Dr. Peterson showed me revealed a new layer of betrayal, a new lie that Daniel had carefully constructed over the years. Sterling Brothers Construction wasn't just an inheritance divided equally between the two of us. It was an operation our father had specifically structured to protect me, knowing that Daniel had problematic tendencies. 45% of the shares had been in my name since 2 years before Dad's death. Daniel managed 40%. The remaining 10% belonged to a trust fund that could only be accessed with the signature of both his brothers. Your father was very smart, Dr. Peterson explained as he organized more documents on the table. He knew Daniel would try to take complete control, so he created this structure to ensure you always had veto power. But there was something more sinister in the papers. Bank records from the last 3 years showed regular transfers from the company account to Daniel's personal accounts. $50,000 here, $70,000 there. In 18 months, he had embezzled over $400,000. That's enough to sue him for embezzlement, I muttered, analyzing the statements. There's more, said the lawyer, sliding over another file. Fake contracts with shell companies. Overpricing of materials. Payments to employees who don't exist. My head was spinning as I tried to process the magnitude of the fraudulent operation my own brother had set up. And then came the worst of it all. An audio recording. His father installed a recording system in the main office after discovering the first irregularities, Peterson explained, turning on a small device. This conversation took place 2 weeks before his death. Daniel's voice echoed through the room, clear and cold. Matt has always been an emotional idiot. When the old man dies, I'm going to convince him to sell his share to me for a ridiculous amount. He trusts me blindly. He always has. A second voice, which I recognized as Jessica's, his wife, what if he refuses? He won't refuse. I'll create a situation where he feels pressured, rejected. Maybe invent financial problems. Make her feel guilty for burdening our family. Matt has a soft heart, he always has. He'll accept anything to avoid conflict. The silence in the lawyer's office was deafening. I could barely breathe. There's more, Daniel's voice said on the recording. The idiot doesn't even know he's already a majority partner. Dad never told her. If I can get him to sign the transfer papers before he finds out, the company will be all his. Jessica laughed. You're terrible, but brilliant. I'm practical. Matt has always lived in the shadow of Dad's favorite. It's time he found out that the real world has no room for sentimentality. When the recording ended, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. It wasn't just the words, but the coldness, the utter contempt in his voice. The person he had looked up to since childhood, who had taken him in after our father's death, had been planning his financial destruction for years. Why didn't Dad tell me about this while he was alive? I asked, my voice breaking. He wanted to. These are her personal notes, Peterson said, showing me handwritten pages. He was torn between protecting you from the painful truth and preparing you to defend yourself. In the end, he chose to leave you the tools to figure it out for yourself. I walked to the office window, looking down at the bustle of the city below. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that her families were emotional minefields. There's something else you need to know, said the lawyer behind me. Daniel has already begun to implement his plan. I turned quickly. Yesterday, he sent documents to 3 major clients of the company, informing them that you are no longer part of the partnership. He is trying to consolidate contracts in his name only, effectively cutting you out of future profits. My breath caught. Can he do that? Legally? No. But if clients believe he and start doing business exclusively with him, it will be more difficult to reverse the damage. He's betting you'll never find out. That's when something changed inside me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pain. It was a cold, calculating clarity I had never felt before. Daniel thought I was the naive, emotional younger sister. She thought she could manipulate me by using my love for family against me. He had completely underestimated who I really was. Or rather, who I could become. Dr. Peterson, I said, turning to face him. I need his help to prepare some documents for me. And I also need a copy of all this evidence. Of course. What do you have in mind? I smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a happy smile, but a determined one. Daniel wants to play chess with me? Perfect. But he hasn't realized one fundamental thing. I'm the majority shareholder. I don't have to react to his moves. I can completely redefine the rules of the game. That afternoon, I left the law office with a briefcase full of legal ammunition and a plan beginning to form in my head. Daniel thought he had kicked me out of his life to gain more control. In fact, he had only freed me to show what I was really capable of. As I drove back to her small apartment, her phone rang. It was a message from Daniel. I hope you're adjusting well. Adult life can be difficult at first, but you'll get used to it. I smiled as I read the message. If he knew what I had just discovered, he wouldn't be sending taunts via text. He would be hiring the best criminal lawyer in town. But it wasn't time to show my cards yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what kind of fraudulent empire my brother had built. And then methodically, piece by piece, I would tear it down. Daniel thought he knew his younger brother. But the Matt he kicked out of the house was no longer the same Matt who now held the keys to the kingdom he thought he ruled alone. The real war was just beginning. And this time, I had all the advantages. Over the next 3 days, my small apartment became a command center. Documents scattered across the makeshift desk, laptop open in multiple tabs, notepads with timelines and contact lists. It looked like the office of a private detective investigating a complex crime. Which, technically, was exactly what it was. The first thing I did was scan all the evidence that Dr. Peterson had given his to me. Every recording, every document, every bank statement. I created copies in 3 different places: the cloud, an encrypted flash drive, and a physical copy stored in a safe deposit box I rented at the bank. Daniel always called me paranoid when I backed up everything on my computer. Ironic how that paranoia would now be his downfall. But I couldn't just show up with the evidence and expect everything to magically work out. Daniel had connections, influence, and 15 years of practice in manipulating situations to his advantage. If I attacked head-on, he would find a way to turn the situation against me. I needed to be smarter than that. I started by studying his patterns. I reviewed old company emails, analyzed financial reports from the last 5 years, and mapped out all of his professional and personal contacts. Daniel was a creature of habit, and habits create vulnerabilities. I discovered that he had a monthly meeting with potential investors every third Thursday of the month at the same fancy restaurant downtown. He always asked for table 16, always arrived 15 minutes late to look important, and always paid with the company's corporate card. A corporate card from a company of which I was the majority shareholder. The second discovery came through further research in public records. Daniel had purchased a $300,000 apartment the previous year, registered solely in his name. The problem? His official salary as the company's administrator did not justify this purchase, especially considering that Jessica did not work. More evidence that he was using company money for personal expenses. But the crown jewel came when I managed to remotely access the company's email system. As a majority partner, I was technically entitled to this access, but Daniel had changed all the passwords after our father's death. Fortunately, Dad had taught her more about the business than Daniel realized, including the fact that there was a backup administrator account that only Dad and I knew about. What I found in those emails made me sick for 3 different reasons. First, Daniel wasn't just embezzling money. He was actively sabotaging projects that could benefit me as a partner, rejecting lucrative contracts when he found out she would be entitled to a percentage of the profits. Second, he had lied to several important clients about my departure from the company. Some emails contained explicit statements that she had resigned due to incompetence, and that the company was better off without problematic elements. Third, and most shockingly, he was planning to forge my signature on property transfer documents. There were emails with a questionable lawyer discussing the legal feasibility of poorly documented post-mortem transfers, and whether it would be possible to contest her legitimacy as an heir. My own brother was planning to legally rob his own sister. That night, I called Dr. Peterson. "I need to schedule an urgent meeting," I said when he answered. "And I think we're going to need a criminal lawyer as well." "Have you discovered something new?" "I've discovered that Daniel isn't just stealing from the company. He's planning to steal her share of the inheritance as well." The silence on the other end of the line lasted almost a full minute. "Matt," he finally said, "I think it's time we stopped documenting crimes and started preventing them." We set a date for the next morning. But that night, something unexpected happened. Jessica called me. "Matt." Her voice was shaky, almost a whisper. "Can you talk? Daniel isn't home." "Sure, Jessica. Is everything okay?" "No, it's not." A long pause. "Can I meet you somewhere? There's something you need to know." I met Jessica at a small, inconspicuous cafe 20 minutes from where she lived. She looked exhausted, with deep circles under her eyes and her hands shaking slightly as she held her coffee cup. "He doesn't know that I know," she began, looking over her shoulder as if Daniel might appear at any moment. "About the money, about the documents, about everything." My heart raced. "What do you know, Jessica?" "Last night, he got a call. He was in his home office, door closed, but the walls are thin." She took a deep breath. "It was about you. About taking care of Matt before you found out about the inheritance." The room seemed to spin around me. "Take care of how?" He mentioned something about a convenient car accident, and laughed. Tears began to stream down her face. "Matt, I married a monster. And now I'm pregnant with his child." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Daniel wasn't just planning to rob me. He was considering killing me. "Jessica, you need to get out of the house. Now." "I can't. He controls everything. The bills, the car, even my phone is on his plan." She leaned forward. "But I can help you. I can record conversations, take pictures of documents. He keeps everything in the office safe, and I know the combination." At that moment, I realized that Daniel had made the same mistake that many criminals make. He underestimated the people around him. He thought Jessica was just a submissive, decorative wife. He didn't realize that by threatening her brother's life, he had turned his greatest ally into his worst enemy. "Jessica, if you do this, there's no turning back." He'll find out eventually. I know. She wiped her tears with determination. But I can't let him hurt you. And I can't raise a child knowing that his father is capable of this. We spent the next 2 hours devising a plan. Jessica would photograph all the documents in the safe, record compromising conversations using the old cell phone she kept hidden, and document any suspicious behavior. In return, I would guarantee her financial security when it was all over. As the majority partner in the company, I could offer her a position with a salary sufficient for her independence. If you're following this story of family betrayal and want to find out how this web of lies will unravel, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Jessica discovered in that safe completely changed the game. When I left the cafe that night, it was no longer just Matt, the naive younger brother who had been kicked out of the house. It was Matt, the majority partner in a company that was being looted, with an unexpected ally inside enemy territory and enough evidence to completely destroy the life that Daniel had built on lies. Daniel thought he was playing chess against an amateur. He didn't realize that I had turned the board upside down, and now we were playing a completely different game. A game where I controlled all the pieces that really mattered. And in the next 48 hours, he would discover that underestimating family can be the most expensive mistake anyone can make. The silent war was about to become an open battle. And this time, I had all the advantages. Jessica kept her word in a way that exceeded all my expectations. Over the next 2 weeks, he turned into a consummate spy, documenting Daniel's every suspicious move with the precision of a professional investigator. The photographs she took of the safe revealed a criminal operation far more elaborate than I had imagined. Daniel wasn't just embezzling money from our company. He had created an entire network of shell companies, fake contracts, and fictitious partnerships that drained resources from at least 6 different businesses in the region. But it was the recording she obtained on Thursday night that completely sealed his fate. Daniel was on the phone with someone he called our friend in the licensing department. The conversation lasted 43 minutes, and every word was recorded with crystal clarity on the hidden cell phone Jessica had left in the office. "I need you to speed up the process of revoking Matt's building permit," Daniel's voice said. "Make up some irregularity, anything. The more bureaucratic complications he has, the faster he'll give up and accept my purchase offer." The response from the other side was equally compromising. "It's going to cost extra this time. I'm taking greater risks with this kind of favor." "No problem. I'll deposit double the usual amount tomorrow. I just need Matt to be prevented from operating legally for at least 6 months. Enough time for me to consolidate all the contracts in his name." He didn't know I was recording when he called the company accountant yesterday. The second recording was even more devastating. Daniel instructing the accountant to adjust the financial reports to hide the misappropriation of funds, while simultaneously artificially inflating operating costs to justify poor performance that he planned to use as a pretext to force her out of the partnership. "If anyone asks about the discrepancies in the last 18 months, Daniel said in the recording, you'll say that Matt was making questionable financial decisions. That you tried to warn him several times, but he didn't listen. Document everything in that regard. Create a history that justifies our version." When the recording ended, the silence in my apartment was so thick that I could hear his heart beating in my ears. "Jessica," I finally said, "you've just given me enough evidence to completely destroy his life." She looked at her with a determination I had never seen before. "He destroyed our family first. He turned his husband into a criminal, and even I don't know who he really is anymore." That night, I spent hours on the phone with Dr. Peterson, organizing our final strategy. It wouldn't just be a confrontation. It would be a coordinated operation involving the Internal Revenue Service, the District Attorney's Office, the City Builders Association, and at least 3 clients who had been defrauded by Daniel's schemes. "Matt," said the lawyer, "with this evidence, you're not just going to regain control of the company. You'll have Daniel arrested for fraud, tax evasion, active corruption, and embezzlement. We're talking about decades in prison." But I wanted more than legal justice. I wanted Daniel to feel the same humiliation she had inflicted on me. I wanted him to experience the feeling of having his life fall apart while people he had underestimated revealed they had absolute control over his destiny. The perfect opportunity arose the following Friday. Daniel had scheduled a meeting with the 3 largest investors in the region to present a proposal for the company's expansion. It was his moment of glory, the presentation that would consolidate her position as the sole legitimate owner of Sterling Brothers Construction. Jessica informed me that he had spent weeks preparing the presentation, rehearsing each slide, each sales pitch. He had even bought a new suit and reserved the most exclusive conference room in the most expensive hotel in town. What he didn't know was that I had contacted all 3 investors personally the week before. Richard Morrison, CEO of Morrison Holdings, was the first to return his call. Matt Sterling? Of course I remember you. We worked together on that shopping center project 3 years ago. Excellent work, by the way. I briefly explained the situation and sent copies of the most relevant evidence. Her response was immediate and furious. This man tried to sell me shares in a company he doesn't even legally control? And using embezzled funds as collateral? Matt, I'll attend this meeting, but not for the reasons he expects. Similar conversations with the other 2 investors produced equally indignant reactions. When I told them about the shell companies and fraudulent contracts, Sarah Chun of Pacific Investment Group was blunt. We want to see him in jail. And we want our presence at this meeting officially recorded as evidence that we were victims of attempted fraud. On the morning of the meeting, I arrived at the hotel an hour before the scheduled time. I settled discreetly into the bar adjacent to the conference room, where I had a direct view of the main table through the glass doors. The investors arrived on time, looking serious, their briefcases organized. Daniel showed up 15 minutes later, radiating confidence, greeting everyone with that arrogant smile I knew so well. I watched through the glass as he set up his laptop and began his presentation. Expansive gestures, colorful slides, optimistic projections of growth and profit. For 20 minutes, it was a flawless performance by an experienced salesman. Then Richard Morrison interrupted. Even without hearing the exact words, I saw the precise moment when Daniel's countenance changed. His smile faltered, his posture stiffened, his hands stopped in mid-air in the middle of a gesture. Morrison was showing documents. Sarah Chun was pointing to something on her own laptop screen. The third investor, James Walsh, was speaking with an expression of growing indignation. Daniel tried to argue. I saw his lips moving rapidly, his hands gesturing more and more desperately. But with each passing minute, her position became more untenable. Then Morrison made a phone call. Even from a distance, I could tell he was talking to the authorities. Daniel tried to get up, perhaps to leave the room, but his sister, Sarah Chun, apparently stopped him, pointing to the chair with a firmness that brooked no argument. It was at that moment that I decided to enter the room. I knocked lightly on the door and entered without waiting for permission. Daniel turned to me with an expression of utter shock, as if it were his seeing a ghost. Sorry to interrupt, I said calmly, addressing the investors. I'm Matt Sterling, majority partner at Sterling Brothers Construction. I believe you have some questions about the legitimacy of this presentation. The silence that followed was so profound that I could hear the air conditioning running on the ceiling. Daniel tried to speak. Matt, what are you doing here? This is a private meeting. Using funds that you illegally embezzled over 2 years as collateral. I slid a folder across the table toward the investors. Here are the documents proving my position as majority shareholder, along with complete evidence of the financial crimes committed by Daniel Sterling over the last 24 months. The color drained completely from Daniel's face. You can't prove any of this. I smiled for the first time in months. Actually, I can. Jessica helped me a lot with this. I saw his eyes widen when I mentioned his wife's name. Understanding washed over his face in waves, just as I had imagined. First the surprise that I knew intimate details of his operations, then confusion about how I had gained access, followed by disbelief that her own wife had betrayed him, and finally that painful clarity that there was no way out. Jessica wouldn't do that, he muttered, more to himself than to me. I pulled out my phone, opened the recording app, and pressed play. Her own voice filled the room, crystal clear and incriminating. I need you to speed up the process of revoking Matt's building permit. I stopped the recording after 30 seconds. I have 43 full minutes of this conversation, Daniel. And 6 more hours of similar recordings documenting active corruption, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The police will arrive in about 10 minutes to take Daniel to the station. I don't believe his presence is necessary for what comes next. But none of them moved. Richard Morrison crossed his arms and declared, actually, we'd rather watch. We want to see for ourselves how this plays out. Daniel finally found his voice. Matt, we can work this out as a family. There's no need to involve the authorities. We can negotiate a smooth transition, split everything 50-50, and forget about these misunderstandings. 50-50? I let out a laugh. Daniel, you still don't get it. You have nothing to negotiate with. 45% of the company is mine, 10% is from the trust fund I now control, and 40% is his. Except that her share will be confiscated as proceeds of criminal activity. I pulled another document from the folder. In addition, as of Monday, you will no longer have access to the company's facilities, bank accounts, or operations. I will be taking complete administrative control while you await trial. Then came the part one had planned as the final blow. Oh, and about her house. You remember using the company as collateral for the financing? Well, as the new controller of the company, I'm foreclosing on that collateral immediately. You have 48 hours to vacate the property. The look on Daniel's face at that moment was something I will never forget. It wasn't just defeat, it was the complete recognition that every move he had made over the past few years had only strengthened my position while weakening his. You planned this from the beginning, he muttered, more of a statement than a question. No, Daniel. You planned this from the beginning. I just learned to play the same game he did, only better. That's when we heard the sirens approaching the hotel. Daniel looked at the window, then at me, then at the investors who were watching everything with morbid fascination. Jessica really turned him in, he said, his voice almost inaudible. Jessica chose to protect the family you were destroying. Just like I did. The footsteps of the police echoed in the hallway. Daniel straightened his shoulders in a last attempt to maintain dignity, but I could see that he was broken inside. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked at me one last time. This doesn't end here, Matt. I smiled calmly. Actually, it does. You took care of that when you decided to kick him out of the house. As they led him away in handcuffs through the hotel lobby, with dozens of people watching, I felt something that was neither satisfaction nor revenge. It was resolution. The circle had closed, and for the first time in months, he could breathe fully. The investors sought him out after the arrest. Instead of Daniel's partners in crime, they now wanted to discuss legitimate business with Sterling Brothers Construction under new management. Are you interested in expanding operations? Saracen asked. After seeing how you handled this situation, we believe the company is in much more capable hands now. But the real satisfaction came 2 hours later when Jessica called me, crying with relief. You did it, Matt. You finally did it. Daniel thought he was playing chess against his naive younger brother. He didn't realize that I had spent months studying every move of her, anticipating every move, and building a trap from which there was no possible escape. The most painful fall, I discovered that day, is when you realize that your own arrogance was the architect of your destruction. 3 months later, I was sitting in the main office of Sterling Brothers Construction, now officially renamed Sterling and Associates Construction. The same office where Daniel used to sit in his leather chair, plotting how to steal from me. The difference was palpable. Where once there had been an atmosphere of tension and secrets, now we breathed transparency and genuine growth. Jessica had become my administrative manager, and her pregnancy was progressing beautifully. Away from Daniel's toxicity, she blossomed into a version of herself I had never seen before, confident, decisive, brilliant. The third quarter numbers are in, she said, walking into the office with a folder and that genuine smile that had become commonplace since Daniel left our lives. We've grown 42% since you took full control. It wasn't just about money. Former employees had returned after discovering that Daniel was exploiting them with below-market salaries. New talent arrived, attracted by the reputation for integrity we were building. The phone rang. It was Dr. Peterson. Matt, I have news about Daniel, said the lawyer. The trial ended yesterday. 5 years in prison for embezzlement, plus 3 years for active corruption. In addition, he will have to reimburse all the misappropriated funds with interest and monetary correction. I felt a quiet satisfaction, but not the kind of vengeful joy I had expected. It was more like relief. Like when you finally remove a stone from your shoe after walking with it for miles. And there's more, Peterson continued. He tried to appeal, claiming that he forged evidence. The judge rejected it immediately. He said he had never seen a case with such meticulous and irrefutable documentation. When I hung up, Jessica was watching me curiously. How does it feel to know it's over? She asked. I thought for a moment. Not how I imagined I would feel. I thought there would be more drama, more emotional satisfaction. But really, it's just relief to be able to focus completely on the future. That afternoon, I visited our father's grave. I brought the company's latest financial statements and whispered about how I had honored his legacy. Dad, you were right about Daniel. But you were also right about me. I wasn't your favorite because of weakness. It was because you saw something I didn't see in myself, the strength to make the hard choices when necessary. A week later, we received a purchase offer from a Dallas construction company. They wanted to make an offer to acquire our company for an amount that would make me a very wealthy man. I rejected it immediately. It wasn't about money. It never was. It was about proving, mainly to myself, that I could turn something corrupt into something genuinely valuable. Jessica laughed when I told her about the rejected offer. You've changed a lot since that day Daniel kicked you out of the house. She was right. The Matt who left home with 2 suitcases, humiliated and lost, was a version of me that no longer existed. In his place was a man who had learned that true family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty and integrity. The last contact I had with Daniel was a letter from prison, 6 months after his sentence. It was 3 handwritten lines. You won this time. But when I get out, I'll get back everything that's his. This isn't over. I showed the letter to Jessica, who shook her head with a mixture of sadness and disbelief. He still doesn't get it, she murmured. He still thinks this was about winning and losing. She was right. Daniel would never understand that there was nothing to get back because it was never really his to begin with. The company, the respect, the family legacy, he had lost it all the moment he chose betrayal over partnership. I filed the letter away with all the other documents from the case. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that some people prefer to build empires on lies rather than legacies on truth. Today, 2 years after that terrible day when he was kicked out of his home, he runs a thriving company, has a loyal team, and most importantly, sleeps peacefully every night knowing that he built it all the right way. Daniel taught me a valuable lesson without realizing it. Real power doesn't come from controlling others, but from being someone others naturally trust. If this story of overcoming adversity and justice has touched his life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, where we discover that sometimes the greatest betrayals reveal his true strength. The final irony? Daniel tried to teach me that life is hard and that family doesn't matter. In the end, he was partially right. Life is hard. But he taught that to the wrong person, in a way that only made me stronger, wiser, and infinitely more prepared to build something lasting. While he counts the days in prison, I count the daily victories of a company that finally honors the family name.